"This money is fake," Maid's daughter said to Billionaire. What he did next shocked everyone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get started. In a lavish office high above the city, a room filled with expensive furniture, a crisp view of the skyline, and the smell of polished wood and leather, a billionaire sat at his desk, preparing to make the deal of a lifetime. Harrison Thorne was a man who had built an empire from the ground up. He was the CEO of one of the world's largest tech companies. Today he was in his element, surrounded by high-ranking executives, investors, and a room full of power players. The deal he was about to finalize could change the future of energy. His company had just developed an innovative new device that promised to revolutionize the way cities powered themselves. The stakes were high, and everyone in the room was anxious. But in the corner of the room, standing in the shadows, was a figure no one thought twice about. A young girl, no more than 12 years old, the maid's daughter. Her name was Sophie. She wasn't supposed to be here, but her mother had brought her along. She was there to quietly sit in the corner and remain invisible. She had no idea that the events unfolding in this room would change her life forever. Sophie had spent most of her life in the background, never drawing attention to herself. Her mother had worked as a maid for the Thorne family for years, cleaning their mansion, looking after their needs, and keeping everything running smoothly. Sophie had grown used to the world of the rich and powerful, but she always knew she didn't belong. As she stood in the corner of the room, Sophie kept her eyes on the floor, quietly observing everything around her. She had no interest in the business discussions taking place. She didn't understand most of the technical jargon being tossed around, and she didn't care. She just wanted to stay out of sight. But today was different. As the conversation shifted towards a discussion of finances, Sophie couldn't help but notice something strange. On the table in front of her, there were stacks of money, piles of $100 bills. They looked real, shiny, crisp, just like the money she had seen in the past when her mother had been given tips or when she would see people paying for their services. But something was off. Sophie's sharp eyes, which had always been trained to notice the small details, picked up something unusual. The bills were slightly too new, almost as if they had been printed recently, and there was a strange texture to the paper that didn't feel right. She leaned in a little closer, trying to get a better look. It was then that she saw it. An almost invisible mark on the corner of one of the bills. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She had seen enough of these to know that this was not real money. This was counterfeit. Sophie knew that this was a situation no one in the room could ignore, but she also knew that no one would listen to her. After all, she was just a maid's daughter. But something inside her urged her to speak up. She couldn't let this go unnoticed. With a deep breath, she walked over to the table where Harrison Thorne and his team were discussing the details of the deal. They all turned to look at her, and for a moment, Sophie felt a wave of nervousness rush over her. She could feel the weight of their stares. But she took a step forward, her voice steady as she said, "This money is fake." The room went silent. Harrison's jaw dropped, and everyone turned to look at her in disbelief. The atmosphere shifted from one of high-stakes business to one of confusion and disbelief. Sophie had just made a statement no one had expected. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited for Harrison to respond. What would he do next? Would he brush her off, or would he take her seriously? No one knew, but one thing was certain. Sophie had just turned the tables on a room full of billionaires. The room remained still, as if time itself had frozen. Sophie's words hung in the air. A quiet declaration that had shaken the foundation of the business meeting. The billionaire, Harrison Thorne, stared at the young girl in disbelief. His sharp eyes, usually so confident, were clouded with confusion. He had built his empire on the foundation of trust, precision, and knowledge, yet here was this girl, a maid's daughter, telling him his money was fake. How could that be? He had just been preparing to finalize a deal worth billions of dollars. Could she be right? Could it all be a lie? The thought was almost too much for him to process. For a moment, Harrison remained speechless. The room was silent, and everyone's eyes were locked on Sophie. They couldn't believe what they had just heard. Sophie, however, stood there, calm and composed, as if she had expected this reaction. She had no idea what would come next, but she knew she had spoken the truth. The money was fake, and she wasn't going to back down. After what seemed like an eternity, Harrison slowly leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the stacks of bills on the table. He reached out, grabbing one of the bills Sophie had pointed to, his fingers brushing over the crisp paper. His expression changed instantly. The bill felt wrong. The texture was off, the weight was wrong. He could sense it now. Sophie was right. This was counterfeit money. His heart raced. How had this happened? The entire deal, the one that had taken months of negotiations, was based on false currency. He looked around the room at his executives, who were equally stunned. No one had noticed. No one had seen it. And now, the deal was on the verge of collapsing because of one sharp-eyed girl. Harrison slowly stood up, his chair scraping against the marble floor. He was no longer the confident billionaire. The weight of the situation was pressing on him. He turned to Sophie, his voice quiet but steady. "How did you know?" he asked, his tone almost respectful now. Sophie didn't hesitate. "I've seen enough fake money before, sir. My mom works here, and I've seen the way people treat her, like she's invisible. But I pay attention to everything. Even the smallest details matter." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that no one in the room had expected. Harrison stood still for a moment, absorbing her words. He had lived his entire life in a world of luxury, surrounded by wealth and power, but this little girl had just taught him something important. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about status. It was about paying attention to the details that others missed. He looked at his executives, his mind racing. This could have ruined everything. But thanks to Sophie, they still had a chance to fix it. "We're going to need to get to the bottom of this," Harrison said, his voice firm once again. He turned back to Sophie, his gaze softening. "Thank you. You may have just saved my company." Sophie nodded, her heart racing. She hadn't expected this kind of response. She had just been trying to do what was right, to speak the truth. But now, she was the one being thanked by one of the most powerful men in the world. It was surreal. As the room slowly returned to life, with Harrison giving instructions to his team to investigate the counterfeit money and fix the situation, Sophie quietly stepped back into the shadows. She was just a maid's daughter. She didn't belong in this world. But for a moment, she had changed everything. The days following Sophie's revelation were a whirlwind. Harrison Thorne's world, which had once seemed so certain and full of power, was now uncertain. The counterfeit money scandal had shaken the foundations of his company, and Sophie, the young maid's daughter, had become an unlikely hero. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about integrity, trust, and the simple, quiet courage of a child who had noticed what no one else had. Sophie found herself drawn into a world she had never imagined. Harrison had personally requested a meeting with her, something she could never have dreamed of in her wildest fantasies. She had never been in a room like this before, surrounded by polished wood, expensive artwork, and sleek furniture. As she entered Harrison's office, she felt out of place, a young girl from a working-class background, now standing in front of one of the most powerful men in the world. Harrison's office was nothing like she had imagined. It was a place where billion-dollar decisions were made, a space that exuded authority and control. Yet, today, there was an air of quiet humility. Harrison looked at Sophie with respect, a warmth in his eyes that was new for him. "Sophie, I owe you an apology," he began, his voice steady. "What you did was extraordinary. You saw something none of us did. You saved my company." Sophie, still unsure of how to respond, shifted nervously from foot to foot. "I didn't do anything special, sir. I just noticed something was wrong. I'm glad I could help." Her voice was soft, but there was an undeniable strength in it. Harrison smiled, though there was a hint of regret in his eyes. Sometimes the most important things in life are the small details. Most people ignore them. But you, Sophie, you saw what mattered. Sophie looked down at her shoes, unsure how to process the praise. It was one thing to hear it from her mother, but to hear it from a billionaire who had everything at his disposal was different. Harrison continued, "I've spent my entire life focused on business, on making money, on building this empire. But you've taught me something more important. It's not always about the big deals or the grand gestures. It's about honesty, integrity, and paying attention to the little things that others overlook." Sophie's heart swelled with pride, but she remained humble. I didn't mean to teach you anything, sir. I just did what felt right. Harrison stood up and walked to his desk. He picked up a folder and handed it to Sophie. This is for you, he said. Sophie looked at the folder in confusion. What is it? It's a scholarship, Harrison explained. You're incredibly intelligent, Sophie. I want to help you get the education you deserve. You've got a bright future ahead of you. Sophie's eyes widened in shock. A scholarship? From him? This was beyond anything she had ever imagined. But, why me? She stammered. Why not someone else? Harrison placed a hand on her shoulder. Because you're the kind of person the world needs more of. The kind of person who sees the truth when others don't. You've got something special, Sophie. Don't waste it. Sophie's mind raced as she processed the words. She had always felt like she didn't belong in a world of wealth and power, but now, Harrison was offering her a chance to be part of it. It was a chance to change her life, to change everything. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. Harrison smiled warmly, his eyes softening. You've earned it, Sophie. I'll be keeping an eye on you. As Sophie left the office, she felt as though she were walking on air. She had never imagined that one small act of noticing something out of place could lead to such an opportunity. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. She had made a difference, and now, her future was wide open. Sophie had no idea where this journey would take her, but one thing was for sure. She would never forget the day she spoke up and changed everything. Weeks passed, and Sophie's life began to change in ways she never imagined. The scholarship from Harrison Thorne was just the beginning. It wasn't just a financial gift. It was a doorway to a future she had once thought was out of reach. Sophie continued her studies with a determination that surprised even herself. She excelled in her classes, quickly realizing that her natural ability to observe and analyze the world around her wasn't just a gift, it was a skill. She was able to see things others missed, and that skill helped her in every aspect of her life. But as she began to rise, so did the whispers. There were some who doubted her place in this new world. Some of the other students at her new school, who came from wealthy families, looked at her with suspicion. They questioned how a maid's daughter could suddenly be given such a privilege. Sophie didn't let it bother her. She had learned early on that what people thought of her didn't matter as much as what she thought of herself. But there were times when it got to her. She would walk through the hallways of her school, surrounded by students with expensive clothes and designer shoes, feeling like an outsider. She reminded herself that she belonged here because of her talent, her intellect, and her willingness to do what others wouldn't. Meanwhile, Harrison Thorne kept his promise to Sophie. He mentored her, offering guidance and wisdom when she needed it most. He wasn't just a businessman. He was someone who understood the value of hard work and integrity. As their relationship grew, Harrison started to see Sophie as more than just the maid's daughter who had saved his company. He saw her potential, and he began to offer her opportunities he knew would help her grow. He invited her to meetings, asking for her opinion on decisions, and giving her small but important projects to work on. It was clear to everyone around him that Harrison was investing in Sophie, and they began to take notice. One afternoon, Harrison invited Sophie to a board meeting at his company. She had never been in a room like this before, surrounded by the world's top executives and decision-makers. The room was filled with people dressed in sharp suits, their faces serious as they discussed the future of the company. As Sophie sat at the table, she couldn't help but feel out of place. But she didn't let that stop her. She had worked too hard to get here, and she wasn't going to let anyone make her feel small. Harrison turned to her during the meeting and asked for her thoughts on a new business proposal. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. Sophie took a deep breath, gathered her thoughts, and spoke with clarity and confidence. She pointed out details others had missed, offering insights that impressed even the most seasoned executives. Harrison looked at her with a proud smile. The room erupted in murmurs of approval. In that moment, Sophie realized that she wasn't just a maid's daughter anymore. She was someone who had earned her place at the table. The road ahead was still long, and she knew there would be challenges, but she was no longer afraid. She had proved to herself, and to everyone else, that she was capable of greatness. And as she walked out of the meeting room, she felt a sense of pride she had never known before. Sophie's journey had just begun, and she was ready to face whatever came next. As the months went by, Sophie continued to thrive in her new environment, becoming more confident in her abilities. Her reputation had grown, and she was starting to receive the respect she had always hoped for. But with this newfound respect came new challenges. Some of the other students, the ones who had once doubted her, now saw her as a threat. They were no longer dismissive of her background, but instead, they saw her as someone who could potentially take their place. Sophie felt the pressure, but she refused to let it break her. She knew that her success was not based on her background or the wealth around her. It was about her skills, her mind, and her determination. Sophie was no longer just a maid's daughter in their eyes. She was a formidable force. Harrison, ever supportive, continued to guide her through the more difficult aspects of her journey. One afternoon, as they were sitting in his office discussing an upcoming project, Harrison noticed the weariness in Sophie's eyes. "You've been working hard, Sophie," he said, his voice warm with concern. "Maybe it's time to take a step back and think about what you want for yourself, not just for others." Sophie looked at him, surprised by the question. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir. You're always focused on helping others, making things right, fixing the problems you see," Harrison explained. "But what about you? What do you want to achieve for yourself? What's your dream?" Sophie paused, considering the question. For so long, her dreams had been tied to proving herself, to showing that she was capable of more than the world expected of her. But now, sitting in Harrison's office, she realized she had never truly thought about what she wanted for her future. "I want to make a difference," she said finally. "I want to help people, like my mom, and make sure that no one has to feel invisible or overlooked." Harrison nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's a noble goal, Sophie. But don't forget that you deserve to live your dreams too." That night, Sophie lay in bed, reflecting on Harrison's words. She had always been so focused on surviving, on proving that she was worthy of respect, that she had never really taken the time to consider what truly made her happy. Her journey had been one of unexpected twists and turns, but now, she realized, it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. The next day, as she walked into school, something had changed inside her. She wasn't just the maid's daughter. She was a young woman with dreams, with a future that was entirely her own. She had the power to shape her own path, and that realization gave her a new sense of purpose. It wasn't going to be easy. She knew that. There would still be people who doubted her, still challenges to face. But Sophie was no longer afraid. She had come this far because she refused to back down, and she wouldn't stop now. As she looked out across the campus, Sophie knew that her journey was just beginning. And this time, she wasn't just proving something to others, she was proving something to herself. As Sophie settled into her new role in the world of power and influence, she began to feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. The scholarship from Harrison had opened doors she had never imagined, and the lessons she had learned were transforming her life. But even as she thrived academically and professionally, there was something that gnawed at her. The more she rose in stature, the more she felt the distance between herself and the world she came from. She could no longer pretend that she was the same girl who had once cleaned the floors of the mansion, unnoticed and invisible. Her new life was filled with luxury, opportunities, and connections that few could ever dream of, but with it came a growing sense of isolation. One day, as she sat in a cafe after a long day of meetings with Harrison, she found herself reflecting on the journey she had taken. She had come so far, yet she felt like she was losing touch with the things that mattered most. Her family, her roots, the simple life she had once known. Those things felt like they were slipping away. Sophie had always been close to her mother, the one person who had believed in her when no one else did. But as she grew older and her life became more complicated, she found herself growing apart from her. The gap between them seemed to widen with each passing day. She missed the days when life was simpler, when her mother's laugh could fill the room, and when everything felt more genuine. It was in that moment that Sophie realized what she needed to do. She needed to reconnect with the things that had shaped her, the people who had always been there for her, and the values that had guided her from the very beginning. So, Sophie made a decision. She would take a break from the whirlwind of her new life and return to her roots. She would visit her mother, spend time with her family, and remind herself of the importance of staying grounded. It wasn't about rejecting her success or the opportunities that had come her way. It was about finding balance. A few days later, Sophie found herself on a plane back to the small town where she had grown up. The familiar sights and sounds of the place brought back memories of her childhood. She could almost hear the laughter of her friends from when they used to play in the park, and the smell of her mother's cooking as it wafted through the air. When she arrived at her mother's house, she was greeted with open arms. Her mother's smile was warm and welcoming, just as it always had been. They spent the next few days talking, catching up, and enjoying the simple pleasures of being together. Sophie found comfort in the small moments, sharing meals, taking walks, and talking about the old days. It reminded her of the importance of family, of the love that never changed no matter how much time passed. As Sophie sat with her mother one evening, watching the sunset from the porch, she realized that her journey wasn't just about success or recognition. It was about staying true to herself and remembering where she came from. Her mother had always taught her that no matter how far she went, she must never forget who she was. And now, Sophie knew that the true measure of her success wasn't in the wealth she had acquired or the recognition she had earned. It was in her ability to remain humble, to stay connected to the people and the values that mattered most. Sophie returned to her new life with a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer just trying to prove herself to the world. She was living for herself and the one she loved. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, but now she felt ready to face them with strength, wisdom, and a heart full of gratitude. As Sophie returned to her life in the city, she carried with her a renewed sense of clarity and purpose. The time she had spent with her mother had grounded her, reaffirming her belief in the importance of staying true to her roots. However, the challenges in her new life weren't over. Despite her success, she still faced skepticism from some of the people around her. There were whispers in the halls, looks that seemed to follow her wherever she went, and the occasional snide comment from classmates who felt threatened by her rise. Sophie was no longer the shy, unnoticed maid's daughter, but she had learned that even success could come with a price. But this time, Sophie was prepared. She had learned to carry her achievements with humility, never letting the opinions of others define her. One afternoon, as she walked across campus, she was approached by a group of students who had once dismissed her. They had heard about her scholarship and her involvement in the company's projects, and now, they were curious about the girl they had once ignored. They were no longer looking at her with disdain, but with newfound respect. "Sophie, we've been hearing a lot about you," one of them said, a girl who had once mocked her for being out of place. "We had no idea you were involved with Harrison Thorne's company. That's incredible. How did you get into all of that?" Sophie smiled, but there was no arrogance in her reply. "I got here because I noticed things that others didn't," she said simply. "It's all about paying attention to the details, working hard, and being willing to speak up when something isn't right." The girl nodded, clearly impressed. The group's attitude had completely shifted. They were no longer the ones who looked down on her, but the ones asking for her advice. Sophie knew this was just the beginning. The respect she was now receiving didn't come from the power of her connections or the wealth she had gained. It came from the strength of her character, from the way she had carried herself, and from the authenticity she had maintained through it all. As the weeks passed, Sophie continued to rise in both her academic and professional life. Harrison, who had become more than just a mentor to her, offered her a full-time position at his company, something she had never dreamed would happen so soon. She would be working alongside some of the brightest minds in the world, and this opportunity would allow her to shape the future in ways she had once only imagined. The work was challenging, demanding, and at times overwhelming, but Sophie welcomed it. She had learned that the greatest opportunities came with the greatest challenges, and she was ready for whatever came next. Her journey was far from over. There would still be obstacles to overcome, people to prove wrong, and dreams to chase. But Sophie no longer felt out of place. She had earned her seat at the table. She had found her voice. And most importantly, she had found the confidence to live her life on her own terms. One day, as she stood at the top of a tall building, looking out over the city that had once seemed so daunting, Sophie knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The road ahead was hers to shape, and no one could take that from her. She had worked too hard, fought too long, and believed in herself when no one else would. And now, she was living proof that with the right mindset, anything was possible. Months had passed since Sophie's incredible transformation from the unnoticed maid's daughter to a respected figure in both the business and academic world. Her time with Harrison Thorne had shaped her in ways she never thought possible, But even with all the success she had achieved, there was still one more challenge she had to face: her family. Her mother, who had always been her rock, was proud of Sophie, but Sophie could sense the unease in her eyes whenever they spoke about the changes in Sophie's life. Sophie had always believed that her success was meant to help her family, to give her mother the life she had always deserved. But now, as she sat in her mother's kitchen, sipping tea, she realized how much she had changed, and how much her mother had stayed the same. "Sophie, I'm glad you're doing well," her mother said, her voice soft. "But this life you're living, it's so different from what we've known." Sophie nodded, understanding exactly what her mother meant. The world she now inhabited, one of corporate meetings, high-profile events, and a network of influential people, was worlds apart from the humble upbringing they had shared. It was a world of power, money, and opportunity, but it also carried with it a certain distance. "I know, Mom," Sophie said, looking her mother in the eyes. "But I want you to know that no matter how far I go, I'm still the same person. I won't forget where I came from. You and Dad gave me everything I needed to succeed. I'll always be your daughter." Her mother smiled, but Sophie could see the flicker of doubt still in her eyes. Sophie knew that her mother wasn't just worried about the life she had left behind. She was worried that Sophie was becoming someone who no longer belonged to their world, someone who was losing touch with the values they had always held dear. Sophie reached out and took her mother's hand. "Mom, I promise I won't let this new life change who I am. I'm still the same person, and I'm still here for you." Her mother squeezed her hand, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm proud of you, Sophie. I just want you to be happy." Sophie smiled, feeling the weight of her mother's love and concern. It was clear that her mother, despite her worries, just wanted the best for her. "I am happy, Mom, but I want to share this happiness with you. We'll figure it out together." Later that evening, Sophie sat in her room, reflecting on the conversation with her mother. She had worked so hard to get to where she was, and yet, it was clear that the real challenge wasn't the business meetings or the academic achievements. It was maintaining the balance between the new world she was in and the world she came from. She knew she couldn't abandon her roots, the values that had shaped her, but she also knew she couldn't hide from the future. The future was calling her, and it was a future filled with endless possibilities. The key, she realized, was to take the lessons from both worlds and make them work together. Sophie had been given the tools to succeed, but it was up to her to use them in a way that was true to herself. The next day, she called Harrison and told him about the conversation with her mother. "I think I figured something out," Sophie said. "It's not about choosing one life over the other. It's about bringing them together. I want to help my family, but I also want to continue making a difference in the business world. I want to find a way to balance both." Harrison's voice was filled with pride. "That's the right approach, Sophie. You don't have to choose. You've got the power to create your own path." As Sophie hung up the phone, she felt more certain than ever about the future. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would always be challenges ahead. But she knew one thing for sure: she was ready. She had come too far to turn back now, and nothing could stop her from achieving the dreams she had worked so hard for. As the years went on, Sophie found herself in a position she had once only dreamed of, an executive at Harrison Thorne's company, leading projects that would shape the future. But even with all the success and recognition, she never lost sight of her roots. The journey she had taken, from the quiet, unnoticed maid's daughter to a powerful figure in business, had been filled with lessons, sacrifices, and the support of those who believed in her. Every day was a reminder of the importance of hard work, humility, and integrity. But now, Sophie was at a crossroads. She had achieved so much, yet there was one thing left to do: give back. She had promised her mother that she would not forget where she came from, and she had made a vow to herself that she would never let the world of wealth and power change the person she had become. That's when she came up with the idea to create a foundation, one that would support young people from underprivileged backgrounds, helping them get the education and opportunities they deserved. Sophie knew how much it had meant to her, to be given a chance when no one else believed in her. And now, she wanted to make sure that other kids who were just like her had the same chance to succeed. The foundation quickly gained traction. With Harrison's backing and the support of influential people she had met along the way, Sophie was able to build something truly impactful. The foundation provided scholarships, mentorships, and career opportunities, giving young people the tools they needed to build their own futures. Watching it grow was one of the proudest moments of Sophie's life. But it wasn't just about the money or the programs. It was about the people. She had a chance to mentor others, to show them that no matter where they came from, they could succeed if they worked hard enough and stayed true to themselves. Sophie still faced challenges. There were those who doubted her, who thought she had only made it because of her connection to Harrison or her rise through the company. But Sophie had learned long ago that success wasn't just about who you knew or where you started. It was about how you carried yourself and the values you held dear. As she sat in a meeting with her team, talking about the next big project for the company, Sophie realized just how far she had come. She wasn't just a player in the game anymore. She was shaping the game itself. And as she looked out the window of her office, watching the city below, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had achieved everything she had ever dreamed of, but she knew that her true legacy would not be in the wealth or the power she had gained. It would be in the lives she had touched, the young people she had helped, and the example she had set. Sophie had proven, not just to the world but to herself, that no dream was too big and no background too small. Her journey wasn't just about success. It was about staying true to herself, no matter where life took her. And as she thought about her mother, her family, and all the people who had supported her, she knew that the best was yet to come.